This video is going to talk about the roots and the stems on plants and how they basically absorb water into the plant and help water be transported throughout the plant. So let's start with the roots. What do the roots do? Well, roots, if you've ever seen them, if you ever pulled a plant out of the ground, they have these long projections on them there. We call them root hairs. And they can be very long. They can be several yards long. In some cases, the roots of a tree or a plant can stretch out for hundreds of yards, depending on the size of the plant. And basically these root hairs spread out throughout the ground and they travel into the small crevices and small itty bitty holes that are in the soil under the ground. By doing that, the roots allow the plant to have some stability. So basically the roots help hold the plant into the ground with these root hairs. These root hairs spread out throughout the ground into the small crevices in the soil, and they take hold and they help hold the plant into place. They help give it some stability. That's why when you get a rainstorm or a thunderstorm, all of the plants in your neighborhood don't just fall over. Some of them sometimes do, but not all of them. And the reason why is because the roots are helping to hold that plant into the ground so the wind doesn't knock it over and the weather doesn't knock it over. Sometimes if the roots aren't deep enough or the root hairs aren't spread out enough and you get a big enough wind or a big enough storm, that storm will knock the plant over. But most of the time the plants stay in place because those root hairs, again, are traveling down into the soil, into the crevices, and they're kind of holding onto the soil, holding that plant into place. Another purpose for the roots is those long root hairs absorb water. So as they travel through those crevices and those small little holes in the soil, when they find water, they end up absorbing that water into themselves and therefore into the plant. Also, minerals are basically dissolved into the water that is in the soil. So in the soil you have not just dirt, but you also have all kinds of minerals in there. And when it rains and those minerals come in contact with water, they end up dissolving, and they dissolve into that water. So when the roots pull that water out of the soil and absorb it, they also absorb those minerals along with the water. The last thing that roots do is they help push the water up the plant a little bit. So when those roots absorb the water into themselves, they basically will then push them up into the stem just a little bit. Now, I don't want you to get the wrong idea. These roots aren't like super powerful. They don't push the water all the way up to the top of the plant. Okay? They only push it up into the stem just a little bit. Once they get the water up into the stem a little bit, the leaves end up taking over, and we'll talk about how that happens in our next video when we talk about leaves. So what do the roots do? The roots have these long root hairs. They spread out underground into the crevices. They hold the plant into the ground. They absorb water into the plant. They absorb the dissolved minerals that are in that water in the plant, and they help push the water up the plant just a little bit. This is a picture of a root cell, okay? One cell inside of a root on a plant. Now you would not be able to see this with your naked eye because again it's a cell and cells are super small. But if we could take a root cell and look at it under a microscope, it would look kind of like this picture. Root cells, each individual cell has this long projection. This long projection is there so that it basically can go into the little crevices in between the soil, okay, and lodge itself in the little crevices between the soil. Then what happens is water and minerals get absorbed into this long projection and they travel down the projection into a giant vacuole that's located at the end of the cell. Okay? That vacuole then stores that water for the cell. Okay? Then the water travels from that vacuole through the rest of the root system and up into the plant. But this is an example of a root cell. Again, long projection that can go into the crevices in the soil, and then a large vacuole to help store water and minerals until it can travel throughout the rest of the plant. Notice this root cell has no chloroplasts. Remember from our last video, chloroplasts are used in order to do photosynthesis. The chlorophyll inside ends up taking the light from the sun and storing it. You have no chloroplasts in the cell because basically this cell is under the ground and therefore it never gets any light. So it doesn't need to have chloroplasts because it never sees the light of day. This cell is specifically designed to pull water into the plant and minerals into the plant and to help secure the plant and make it more stable. So what do your stems do? Well, once the water travels up through the roots and gets pushed up into the stem a little bit, there are these two different types of tubes that run throughout the stem. The first type of tube that runs up and down the stem is called the xylem. The xylem is a tube that runs up and down the stem and carries water up and down the plant. So xylem tubes are, their main function is to carry water. You can see those in basically the stems of plants. They look kind of like the veins. They also travel into the veins of the leaf. Okay, so those are called xylem. They carry water up and down the plant. The second type of tube that you'll have running up and down the plant is called a phloem. The phloem tubes run up and down the plant and they carry sugars throughout the plant. If you remember when we talked about photosynthesis, once the leaves make these sugars travel all over the plant. They go down to the roots, they go up to the fruit, they go out to the stem, and these phloem tubes actually carry all those sugars up and down the plant to the different parts of the plant where they're stored in the different tissues. So you have the xylem carries water and the phloem carries sugars. If you've ever eaten a piece of celery and you get those long stringy things caught in your teeth from the celery, those actually are the xylem tubes of that celery. They're the tubes that carry the water throughout the plant. So those are the xylem. And again, the phloem carries sugars.